Today I begin a journey diving into the classic era of horror paperbacks. Hi everyone, welcome to Serrated Pages. I'm Ben, and when I was beginning to put this channel together, I was reflecting on the things that really got me back into genre reading. After years of not walking away from reading, but reading falling down the priority list in my life, finding the time to really indulge myself and really enjoy reading to a great extent. One of the most important things that kind of got me back into fiction, especially genre fiction, was a book that was published back in 2017, and it's Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix. This book is a must-have for any lover of genre fiction. It should sit on every bookshelf. Not only is it a fantastic history of paperback horror fiction, particularly the heyday from the 70s into the 80s of the blockbuster paperback fiction that everyone saw on newsstands in newsagents in the UK, airports, supermarkets. It really chronicles the history of that period and the writers and the authors who made those paperbacks so successful. It's also filled with beautiful illustrations of the covers. The cover art on paperback horror fiction, particularly from the 80s, and particularly when I think about my reading growing up as a teenager, it's the covers that really jump out and stand out to me. And they are beautifully replicated in Paperbacks from Hell. So I highly recommend picking up Paperbacks from Hell. It really stirred an interest in me in wanting to read a bunch of these books. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the books featured in Paperbacks from Hell are, or at least were back in 2017, out of print. And so it became pretty hard to get your hands on them unless you stumbled across them in a thrift store or a used bookstore. You could probably track them down at various horror cons or conventions around the country. Fortunately, we live in a world now where people know the value of this type of collectible item, and it could be pretty expensive getting your hands on some of these books. Well, that's where Valancourt Books comes in. Now, Valancourt are a publisher based in the US who specialize in all kinds of things, but one of the things they're very, very good at is reissuing old genre material, particularly horror books. And under the imprint of Paperbacks from Hell, they've reissued over 20 so far of the books that are featured in Grady Hendrix's book, Paperbacks from Hell. This is the first one, The Nest, which is the first one in the series. You see it carries the Paperbacks from Hell logo on it. And so in this series, I am going to go through from the beginning, starting with The Nest in a moment, and give you a little rundown, little capsule reviews of each of the books in the Valancourt Books reissue series, Paperbacks from Hell. Okay, so first up in the Paperbacks from Hell reissue series, we have The Nest by Gregory A. Douglas. And this is a book I was aware of as a teenager, although didn't read it until this last week when I read it for the first time. Gregory A. Douglas is actually a pen name, as many of these authors were at the time, were writers who were writing other more respectable fiction, I guess you would call it, but were writing these kind of trashy horror paperbacks under pseudonyms. And so Gregory A. Douglas is a pseudonym for a gentleman called Eli Cantor, who, very interesting guy when you look him up. There's a little bit of information about him in the front of the book. He was a lawyer. He worked for CBS for many years as an in-house lawyer, but he was also a playwright, a poet. He was a musical composer. He composed orchestral music. And as well as a writer of short stories and other novels under his actual name. And, I guess it's not a surprise that he wrote this book under the pseudonym of Gregory A. Douglas, because this is not great literature, I would think it's fair to say, but what it is a fantastic animal attacks book about killer roaches attacking a New England island and eating people. The Nest was published in 1980, and obviously by then we'd had several very popular animal attacks books, which had led to a whole wave of animal attacks fiction and movies, namely Jaws by Peter Benchley and James Herbert's The Rats. And both of those books influence is very heavy on the nest, I think it's safe to say, in some pretty obvious ways, and actually to the point where the author, Mr. Douglas, does have a lot of fun with playing around with some of the very direct ties to those books, especially. It's set on an island, a small fishing island off Cape Cod, close to Martha's Vineyard, where, you know, the kind of hardworking, small New England town where fishing is the main industry. There is tourist industry through the summer. There are people there who have bought fancy houses and gone there to retire. It is a kind of idyllic New England setting. And right from the very first chapter, it's very clear that there's something else going on there, namely in the city's dump, the garbage dump. And the first chapter of the book is the kind of like description of the garbage dump, and it's starting to tremble as if there's something beneath there moving. Very quickly after that, and this is where we see the very first instance of the nest, the killer roaches. We see rats running from the garbage dump, fleeing, and quickly those rats are eaten by a swarm of killer cockroaches. And that's the first reference he gets in there. He makes rats the victim of the roaches in the very first chapter of the book. And so from there, you know, we basically get a number of killings, and Mr. Douglas is very, very good at pacing the killings. So barely a chapter goes by without some completely appalling act of gory violence being inflicted on residents of the island by the cockroaches, which, you know, come out of the ground, they come out of leaves, and they enter your body through any available orifice, and which is described in truly stomach-churning description throughout. And I don't have a huge insect phobia, but if you are creeped out by bugs to a major extent, I really think you should probably avoid this book, as the descriptions of the way the roaches take down their victims by essentially invading their body and then eating them from inside out is truly skin crawling, even for someone who doesn't mind bugs especially. Although I will say I dislike cockroaches immensely. Growing up in England, cockroaches are a thing, but not really a thing. Moving to California, and particularly staying in hotels in Los Angeles and things like that, I realize why people hate cockroaches. They are vile, vile creatures. And the idea of 5-inch cockroaches kind of hunting and killing people is pretty disgusting. Anyway, so the kills are plentiful and often throughout the book. The plot as it goes is, now tell me if you've heard this one before. There is a bookish animal behavioral scientist who's come from the mainland to investigate the local wildlife. He gets involved and has to bring in an assistant as they start to discover that people are going missing, pets are going missing, children are going missing, and what might be doing this. And so frankly, you know, you need the kind of bookish biology science guy to figure it all out. And so there's lots of exposition as he starts to figure out what's happening, and eventually he figures out that there's roaches that are committing the crimes. You've got the local business owner who is is worried about the potential murders, disappearances happening on the island, but also doesn't really want to disrupt his local tourism business through the summer, and so is a little bit dismissive. Again, pretty Jaws. What you don't have is kind of the Quint character from Jaws of like a bug hunter kind of hunting down the bugs. What happens is the biologist, the animal behavioral scientist, they pull together a group of people on the island, led by the young sheriff, and they figure out a plan to track down the insects which somehow have made a nest somewhere on the island and eventually exterminate it. It's a really fun book, The Nest, right? I will say, for all its derivative nature, and as I said, the setting, the basic plot structure, it follows Jaws to a T throughout. Despite that, he has a really fun, playful way of writing. It's very propulsive. Like, even though it's nearly 300 pages, I read it in a couple of days, in a couple of sittings, basically. The gore scenes are incredibly visceral and unpleasant and plentiful, as I said at the top. The characters are pretty well fleshed out, even though they follow those archetypes. You know, there's the young girl who's related, whose grandfather is kind of the elder statesman of the island, and she's come back to visit, and you know, she has ties to the mainland, but really she's a hometown girl, and she becomes the kind of central character of the book, particularly her romance with the animal behavioral scientist who is investigating the roach population. There's a lot of very detailed scientific explanations of how the roach hive mind is kind of working together, and the different kind of structure within the roach colony of from scavenger roaches to guardian roaches to these giant kind of like vicious warrior roaches. And so yeah, it's, you know, it's very silly. It's a killer roach book, but I will say I had a tremendous time with it, and I would highly recommend it, particularly if you like the Rats and Jaws and any of those kind of animal attacks types books. And you know, if you're just looking for some good gory animal attacks fun that's really well paced and, you know, doesn't let up once it gets going. In fact, it doesn't even take time to get going, because as I said, that opening with the roaches eating the rats is literally the first chapter. So it doesn't let up for a minute. It's possibly, even at its length, which is pretty breezy, a bit too long, and there's an unnecessary epilogue where you get the "oh, it's all okay, but is it" type situation where you get a resolution and you get a sort of a double ending. There's also, you know, his need to continually have roach kills every 2 to 3 chapters is such that he has to continually introduce new characters, anonymous characters, only for them to get immediately killed. The inventiveness in those kills is pretty astonishing. There is one moment where a drunk naked man who's coming back from a party and is high on booze and drugs decides, after getting a little bit let's say horny with himself, decides to hump the pile of leaves on the ground, only to be swarmed by a bunch of roaches who find their way up his available openings. So yeah, if that sounds like the kind of thing you want to be reading, then The Nest is definitely the book for you. Again, Valancourt Books is where you can get it from. It's available all bookstores. There's an audiobook version of it, which I actually listened to as well, which is really fun. And it's available in digital forms as well. The next book in the reissued series of Paperback from Hell novels is When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom. So that's the book I'm going to review next. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that book if you've read it or if you're going to read it along. I should be posting the video for that in a week's time, so probably a week today, hopefully. Outside of that, I'd love to hear just your thoughts on Paperbacks from Hell in general. If you've had a great discovery from that book, I mean, there are literally hundreds of books mentioned in Paperbacks from Hell. So if you discovered something great in there that you want to flag to the community, let us know. And subscribe the video. Please continue to share the videos. That's been hugely helpful in getting the word out there over the first couple of weeks of the channel. And aside from that, I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you next time.